Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Lilith. So the first item we picked up here is Chemical Peel, and I feel like this is an item that's very lackluster. Like, when you find it and you're like, it's a damage upgrade, sure, but because it only affects every other tier, I'm not so stoked about it. Or in the case of Lilith or Cain, there's only a 50% chance of it actually altering a tier for doing more damage. And like, I'm completely on board with you on this one, because when I find this item, I don't think, well, this is an interesting item, but I just feel like this is wasted potential. Because if you knew how this item worked like, and the underlying concept and mechanics I think are really interesting, and let me just explain to you what that is. And that is essentially every character that has two eyes, with how this item affects it. Like, you would just expect this item to affect every other tier that you shoot, and of course every other tier would be altered and then increase in damage. But with how it actually works is, if you have a character that has two eyes, one of your shots are leaving from your left eye, and the other one is leaving from your right eye. And essentially what this item does, it just says every shot that's leaving from your right eye or left eye, doesn't really matter, is gonna get that little bit of a damage upgrade. And you might be saying, well, they went through a lot of trouble of actually coding that if it only works for this item, and also there's Blood Clot, but it's essentially the same thing, because it also just increases the damage on every alternative tier. And you're entirely right. Like, why do we have this item which in the end is kind of entirely inconsequential? If we have all of that mechanics and like all that infrastructure in the game already, how can we kind of expand upon that and improve upon that? And I feel like that's an interesting question. Like, maybe they tested some things out, but didn't really work out that well, so they just kind of scrapped the idea, and of course the remnants of that system still remain in the game. But what I think is a little bit more interesting is how this item actually affects characters which only have a single source of damage. So instead of just being, again, like every alternative there, it's gonna be a more damaging upgrade, with characters like Cain, or in this case Lilith, there's only a 50% chance of every single tier being replaced with a more damaging tier. So it doesn't alternate anymore, it just has like an entirely different effect. And I think that's quite surprising, because they just kind of, I feel like this is a very good indication that they're just kind of given up on the whole system and mechanic as a whole. They just said, instead of just kind of going through the trouble of alternating, just say there's a 50% chance of replacing it. Because in essence what this does, if it's a +2 damage upgrade in the case of Chemical Peel, that means that essentially you're getting a +1 damage upgrade. Because if every other tier is affected, in the average case you're getting a +1 damage, and I can't be too mad about that. I feel like they wanted to try something unique and novel that didn't exist in the game before, and it just didn't really pan out. And of course there's no shame in that. I'm just trying to kind of explore the possibility of what this thing could be. Like, for example, what you could say is every tier that leaves your left eye is gonna have triple amount of damage, and everyone that leaves your right eye is gonna have half of the reduced damage but maybe increased knockback. And what that will allow you to do is to be just a little bit more precise, which at least it would force you to be more precise with the tiers that actually deal 3 amounts of damage, and maybe use the ones that have the reduced damage kind of a bit more strategically. And maybe that won't really pan out. Like, it's just an idea that I thought right on the spot here. So it obviously doesn't really have any value. It would have to be tested, of course, and just kind of put into the game to see how it performs. But I feel like if they went down that avenue, it could be just the item, or at least certain items could feel definitely a little more strategic. I think the biggest contender for this one is the Bookworm transformation. And if you put a monocle like on your right eye, what can end up happening is, like, let's say you know that the shot leaving from your left eye is never gonna have the double effect, but only the one that's leaving your right eye is gonna have like a 50% chance of being a double tier, and that would allow you to kind of account for that. You would say, oh, every other tier that I shoot from is gonna have a chance for it to be enhanced, or at least do more damage, and you would know you would have to be more accurate. I don't know if that would be enough to really kind of make me start paying attention to which eye my tiers are living from, because this is like an extra added step in the whole, like, thinking thing. You would have to think about that as well, and obviously that is that is just a bit too much in some cases. Of course, you don't want to really focus on something like that if you're not really gonna get a good benefit out of it, and obviously just a little bit of a damage upgrade is not really gonna cut it. But I think the avenues and the things that we explored here are interesting, and if you have any ideas, or like if you think that there are any items which would work well with this system, like, drop me a comment. I would really like to know, because I feel like this is a system that could be expanded upon, and some really interesting items could be added. So okay, let's focus on the run. We talked about Chemical Peel enough, and at a certain point, you know, when you're in a Lilith run, you already feel like it's already weak enough that you're pretty much willing to take anything. And at a certain point, I found Ipecac, and Ipecac is an item which I'm not really too fond of in just the general case, because it's so self-damaging, but at least, you know, it's a very sizable damage upgrade. There are some fun synergies you can get with it, and in the most cases, it's really gonna serve just like as an infinite explosion, allows you to find secret rooms, second secret rooms, things like that. That's always great. But in the case of Lilith, what makes it problematic, especially when you have multiple followers behind you, because they lag behind, they're obviously kind of far behind, the arc of the IP kick shot can actually end up hitting you if you're just standing in a regular position, because the source of the tear, or at least of the IP kick explosion, is not from your character, but it's from Incubus. It makes it very likely for you to accidentally hit yourself and aim at yourself and just kind of damage yourself that way. So I'm not really fond of this item on Lilith, and obviously there are things to do that you can kind of circumvent that, like don't use the box of friends in most cases, because it's really gonna be detrimental. Just try to find a better spacebar item, because at that point you already have enough damage, right? You don't need to rely on the second Incubus to have more DPS, because you already have 43 damage, so you can kind of forego that decision to leave it behind, but at that point you kind of lose all the identity that Lilith has, and you're just playing a regular IPK run, just with a little bit of a caveat that you really can't control your shots as well as you would with other characters. So I feel like that's maybe one compromise which I wasn't really willing to make on this run, but also there weren't really any good spacebar items to replace my box of friends with, so I just kind of stuck with it. But the biggest problem I think of this run was that there wasn't really enough health. I did get enough health upgrades, but in terms of spirit hearts, there really just weren't a lot, and I was kind of forced to go through most of the run at a relatively low health. I think I was always below 6 health, and at sometimes it dipped like below 2 or 1. Obviously, a big part of that is due to my fault. I got hit a lot, but also I think there were a lot very difficult and challenging rooms. Like, there was a room with those guts, which roll around the walls, and I just entered it, and instantly, I feel like I moved instantly from my place, and it just kind of ran into me. I really couldn't dodge it. So again, that's like another source of damage, another hit that I don't think I could have avoided, but it definitely could have helped and aided me in my quest of trying to beat Hush. But with how this all kind of came crashing down, I feel like really the ultimate, the standard for this run was set on that very second floor, which I kind of slowed down for you, and I didn't really comment when it happened, and that is I entered the button in like a narrow corridor and I couldn't exit it. And when I entered and pressed the button, there was a trapdoor which spawned right on top of me. And of course, I couldn't exit it. I couldn't go be the boss and get the devil deal. And then I was just kind of forced to go to the next floor, which is obviously a huge bummer, because essentially I missed 2 items, one from the boss room and also one from the devil deal, which could have been very, very helpful. I'm not really sure what they were, but I think I read that they were good enough that they weren't really worth skipping, and maybe they were run defining. I'm not really sure. But that is definitely a mistake I've made, and obviously I would expect a lot of other people to make it as well. And at a certain point, I came into the Hush fight because of I was kind of so afraid of hitting myself with my explosions that I was much more, I would say, cowardly than I usually am against Hush, and that ended up costing me the run, because I feel like I was in a much more passive position than usual. I got hit with a few too many shots, and of course I ended up dying, and still ranked in the 124th place, which is surprising. I guess if I made the executive decision here, I shouldn't have gone to the Hush in the first place. Knowing the circumstances, I only had 5 health containers. I wanted to say 6, but then I retracted to 5. That's why I kind of started there. I had 5 plus, I think, 1 spirit heart, or 4 plus 1 spirit, I'm not sure, doesn't matter. And what ended up happening in that situation is, of course, I just got hit a bit too much. I ended up dying, which is a bit of a bummer, but I feel like it's to be expected. What I should have done, really just left on the next floor and tried to kind of beat the rest of the game with only those 5 health containers and just kind of forgo Hush. What I was banking on is maybe getting a little bit more of an offensive punch in those item rooms, or just finding something really good in the shop which could aid me with in this quest, so something like the stopwatch, or maybe even like some other item which would maybe give me an increased chance of getting spirit hearts from the chest. But sadly nothing like that happened. The entirety of the run really was a bit of a bummer. Like, the devil deals weren't that good, and if I decided to take them, I feel like I would have even less health. They were just mostly familiars which really don't do a lot of damage, so it was just one of those which I feel like are very underperforming runs, but there's really nothing wrong with that, and I feel like at a certain point you just really need to call it quits. Well, with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.